there's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. That's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will.
The more Mark Carney talks with the media, the more we understand why he's been trying to avoid them for so long. Reporters from Canada followed Mark Carney to Europe and challenged him on his lack of transparency. Ironically, Mark Carney's disdain for media accountability was the only thing he was transparent about, but not by choice.
Let's take a look.
Prime Minister Michael Couture with CTV News. I take your point earlier on a number of our allies talking about our sovereignty today. But nobody's come out forcefully and said those comments about the 51st state are just not on. Do you think that our traditional allies are not sticking their necks out because they're concerned that if they say something that'll anger President Trump, that they'll be next?
I think I would take seriously what the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said today. Look, I don't think one needs to respond to every comment about another country. Look, we can stand up for ourselves. It's Canada strong. We can stand up for ourselves. We've called out those comments. They're disrespectful. They're not helpful, and they need to stop before and the conversation about our broader partnership with the United States. But we're Canada. We don't need other people to come to our aid. Come on.
Okay, so the reason why the Prime Minister is usually somebody who has been a politician is because you need a Prime Minister that knows how to talk.
Not only that, but you need a Prime Minister who understands the geopolitics and the relationships that we have with other countries. I mean, saying, you know, we don't need other countries to come to our aid. Canada's strong. That's kind of like, I don't know, dismissing your allies. What if something does happen?
Well, it also shows a complete lack of understanding of global affairs. Now, as an economist, you can argue maybe Mark Carney understands the economic relationship between countries, but the political relationship between countries, that's a whole other animal.
Yeah, he's totally out to lunch.
So for him to literally say, we don't need other countries to defend us, guess what that does? That opens the door for Donald Trump to say, really? Okay. You don't need defending? We won't defend you. How about that? How about that?
Right. What if some other larger superpower that is not the United States decides to come after us and start a war? What are we going to do? Our military is in shambles. We do rely on our allies as they rely on us to keep each other safe. Like, that's why we're a part of NATO, right? Like, we work together to keep the bad guys at bay.
That's literally the whole point of NATO. So you're basically saying we don't need NATO, we don't need the UK, we don't need France, we don't need anybody. Canada's strong. Like, that's his silly silly slogan, by the way, the man who hates slogans.
You know, during World War I and World War II, Europe needed us to come help. And we went willingly because that's what allies do. So if we were attacked, I would hope that our allies would come to our aid instead of our now Prime Minister going, well, we're strong. We don't need any help.
Have you looked at the military?
You don't think it'd be helpful that they come out and say something?
We have other things. Look, when the Prime Minister of Canada sits down with the President of France or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, we talk about our relationships and where we have responsibilities, not what others are doing.
See the impatience with him?
He treats the reporters like they're stupid. Like, Pierre...
He treats them like they're subordinates in a boardroom.
Yeah, well, Pierre will snap back at them when they ask ridiculous questions that are based on nonsense premises. But, like, this, I think, was a reasonable question, and you can see the way that our now Prime Minister is speaking down to the reporters. He has absolute disdain for them.
Yeah, like, and again, we've talked about this before. He seems annoyed that he has to even speak to these people. Well, guess what, Mr. Carney? This is actually a lot of your job, is to talk to the media. So when people ask you questions, that's your job as the Prime Minister. But, oh, shucks, you haven't really even been elected yet. So,
But again, he wouldn't know this because he's not a politician.
and this is the problem. This is the problem. But the disdain and the impatience when he's dealing with these people, it's so transparent. But this isn't the worst of it, folks.
Mr. Carney, Stephanie Levitz, Globe and Mail. We understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you
Yes.
don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm following them well in advance of any of the requirements, as you know, because I know you know this. You know that these requirements come into effect in months. We're talking days after I became Prime Minister. So I'm complying with the rules of the Ethics Commissioner, going through the processes and all these things that are necessary. And I will remind you, and I'll remind Canadians again, that the Leader of the Opposition cannot find it. And look, you look at the questions this evening, you look at the nature of the discussions, you look at the nature of discussions I had with the President of France, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The Leader of the Opposition would not be capable of having those discussions because the Leader of Opposition refuses to get his security clearance.
He's conflating two different things.
100% is conflating two different things. If you were the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Carney, you wouldn't be able to have these conversations with these other people as well, because you wouldn't have the security clearance that the Prime Minister would have.
Right. And even if you did get your NSICOP security clearance, you would not have the same prime ministerial security clearance. So again, it's just conflating two completely different things that are, quite frankly, not to be compared.
And I was going to say it's either or. I think it's both of these. Number one, he doesn't know the difference because you've never been in government. And number two, he's willfully conflating them anyway. So this is one of the issues. And again, the way he speaks to reporters, Stephanie, I've never heard Pierre patronize a reporter, no matter what outlet they've been, by trying to pat them on the head and call them by name. That's actually a power tactic, and you learn that when you're
in management.
In management,
Yeah.
It's a way to emasculate somebody. So if somebody comes at you and they come at you with an attitude, so Bill comes up here and says, "Oh, Ryan, I'm really unhappy about this, and you made this poor decision." Say, "Well, Bill, you know what we talked about last week. This is the decision that was being made. So, Bill," it's very patronizing. It's intended to be patronizing because you're trying to disarm somebody. You're trying to show them that I'm above you, so you need to be the good little muppet and do what you're told. Now, this is a tactic I've never used because I think it's completely disrespectful. But these guys, global national CEO executives, they use it all the time. And it's equivalent to, "Don't you know who I am?" That's what this is. And he does it a couple times when he says, "Well, you know this, we all know this, and I'll explain it again." And then he goes on to say, "Well, this is a month-long process, but I've done it in a couple days. Congratulations for complying with the process." But the difference between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre is we already know what Pierre Poilievre's disclosures are before becoming Prime Minister.
Right. And we're going to get into that in a moment. Let's listen to the rest of Stephanie's question.
Something that it took me a few weeks to get. And he has been the Leader of the Opposition for 3 years. So I comply with my responsibilities I comply with the rules well in advance, and the leader of the opposition doesn't take his responsibilities at a time of, well, you should take these responsibilities at any time, but it's particularly remarkable given the stakes in global geopolitics at the moment.
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as Prime Minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
Did he just say to her in French, point finish or point over? Like, again, my French isn't very good, but it sounded like he was just like shutting her down.
Yeah, I think it's probably the equivalence of saying in English, like, okay, this is what I've done and I've complied with the rules, period.
Yeah. Again, you guys can tell us in the comments because neither of us speaks French particularly well at all. So if you want to let us know what that is, we'd be grateful. But there's just so many things wrong with that answer that Carney just gave. And it's not just how he shut down the reporter and was refusing to elaborate any further. This is a huge red flag because Stephanie brought up a very good point, is that with the procedure with the ethics commissioner, new appointees to cabinet, which the prime minister is a cabinet minister, they have 60 days to provide their assets and their disclosures to the ethics commissioner, who then has another 60 days to assess all of it. And then within that 120 days, those holdings are to be made public so that Canadians can also see if there's any conflicts of interest. Why this is a problem right now is because Carney's saying, well, I've already put in my conflicts with the conflict of interest, the commissioner, and, that's good enough. I'm following the rules. Canadians are going to be going to an election very soon. The date is estimated to be April 28th or possibly May 5th. And we're expecting that the writ is going to drop this coming Sunday. So that is not 120 days from now. What could hypothetically happen is that Mark Carney right now, he does know what his holdings are, what his assets are, but he could create a platform to benefit his assets. Even though they're in a blind trust, they will still grow. So what could happen, and this is a completely hypothetical situation that I'm making up just to illustrate my point, is that, say for example, Mark Carney has holdings in EV vehicle company. So say that part of the Liberal platform becomes, we're going to give
$100 billion of investment into EV technology.
Well, and not just that, but that we're going to give rebates to Canadians who buy electric vehicles. And he knowingly has stake in electric vehicle companies. So he's running on this premise, and Canadians will elect him possibly based on this promise that, oh, we're going to get money back for buying an electric vehicle. And he would stand to profit from that policy. So that's a huge conflict of interest, but Canadians don't know that. So Canadians are going to the polls not knowing what conflicts of interest the new prime minister has and whether or not we should elect this person again.
Well, and the fact that he is, like, if you saw the body language when she was repeating the question, he was backed up, he was shifting, he was really annoyed, and again, he interrupted her again. Second time he's interrupted a reporter. And completely shut it down. So those of you saying, well, why would Mark Carney call an election? Well, here's the thing. Maybe only Mark Carney knows why. Maybe it's because of one of the conflicts of interest that he actually has, and he wants to run in that election, or call the election, run, and potentially win it prior to Canadians understanding why he doesn't want them to know until after the fact.
Right. I think if Mark Carney wants to run to be the prime minister again, he should tell us exactly what his conflicts of interest are, and we as Canadians can see whether or not those line up with what promises the Liberal Party is making to Canadians.
And if there's no problems, then why do you have an issue making them public? Why not? Wouldn't that endear yourself to Canadian voters saying, listen, I want everyone to know that everything's above board. Here's the complete list. Here you go.
This smells already, and the guy's already been, he's been prime minister for what, 3 days, 4 days? And this already stinks.
Prime Minister for 4 days and elected for 0.
Yes.
Jonathan spent most of his life in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will. I have served in the private sector. I have stood up for Canada. I have left my roles in the private sector at a time of crisis for our country. I'm complying with all the rules. Your line of questioning is trying to invent new rules. I'm complying with the rules that Parliament has laid out and the responsibilities of the Ethics Commissioner. And I will continue to comply with those rules.
So believe it or not, I believe that was Rosemary Barton.
It sounded like her, yeah.
From the CBC. And it sounded like, we're going to, augment this after the fact, but it sounded like she was saying that, you should be disclosing this stuff now. And the fact that you're not, it appears to everybody that you do have conflicts of interest that you don't want to disclose. And then Mark Carney's answer is, well, that's your problem, Rosemary.
Look inside yourself,
Look inside
Rosemary.
yourself. You're starting from a position and an assumption of evil. Dude. So it's holy.
This is unbelievable, because if Mark Carney does have conflicts of interest that he then runs on in this upcoming election, Canadians could be voting to make this man richer.
Right.
This is not okay.
And what if after the election, let's just say hypothetically, if we all do our jobs, it's not going to happen. But hypothetically, if the Liberals win and Mark Carney's prime minister, what if he starts diverting a whole bunch of funding to the United States, where his companies are? What if he starts diverting a whole bunch of funding to South America, where his company's investments are? To the Middle East, where his company's investments are?
What if he's just in it to make himself and his buddies richer? This is the problem. None of us know right now. How can you make an informed vote as a Canadian citizen, which is our democratic right, without this information?
And this guy is up there as prime minister who owes journalists answers. And the journalists are actually asking good questions here. So I credit where credit is due. So hats off to CTV, CBC, and Globe and Mail. Great questions. And sucks when you actually have to answer questions to the media and you can't just walk back into your boardroom, Carney? So, Canadians, doesn't matter if you support the Conservatives, doesn't matter if you support the Liberals, doesn't matter what party you support. The important thing is to know is this is the guy that is being touted by the liberal elite establishment as the savior of Canada. Now, if you asked Liberals a couple of years ago if they think that an old, white, rich guy should be the face of the Liberal Party, they would have probably thrown a bunch of insults at you, because that is completely contrary to what the narrative has been the last 10 years. Now, when you look at Mark Carney, he's not just an old white guy that's rich. He's an old white guy that's rich that has disdain for being held accountable. He has disdain for our journalistic process that is supposed to be one of the checks and balances against our government in a democracy.
And not only that, but he has disdain for the Canadian people. He's refusing to tell us through the journalists exactly what his holdings are. Again, Canadians are going to be going to an election very soon. And we could be voting to make this man and all of his friends richer.